Thanks so much, Sarah. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for spending the next hour of your time with me this morning. We're going to talk about some heavy topics, but the better informed we are, the better service we are to our students and families. So thank you for battling through this with me this morning. We're going to be as you should know, being signed up for this webinar, we're going to talk about trauma-informed safety planning as it pertains particularly to schools. So what I hope for you to get out of this next hour together is a little bit of understanding how we came to this work. Again, I've been in education my whole life, but where does Joffe stand and how can I represent that to you? We're going to talk a little bit about the basics of emergency response. Again, that's a whole nother training session, but it feeds into all practices with that trauma-informed lens. So going to brush very quickly over the basics of emergency response and really get into the nitty-gritty, the most kind of invoking trauma response comes in play when we talk about lockdown drills. So we're gonna talk about how we can prepare, plan, and debrief about lockdown drills specifically. And then hopefully we have enough time. I'd like to really walk you all through how do we debrief an incident? How do we debrief a drill to make sure that we are reflective and then we can do better for next time. Drills are a great learning opportunity, and that's really how we want to approach it, but it goes hand in hand with that debriefing strategies. So that's what the next bit of time together looks like. Just a big picture overview. Who are we? Joffe Emergency Services started as a company that provided CPR training to schools and grew from there when they asked us to start helping them write and draft their emergency operations plans. And then they wanted us to come and train and drill on that. And so our company does have 3 school-based divisions to help support all of the safety needs of students and staff. We serve coast to coast across the entire United States, independent, charter, public schools. We do it all. But we do this with the approach that we want to leave schools feeling confident and competent in coordinating their emergency response procedures and protocols. We don't want to be there. I mean, we do, but we don't want to be there the entire, length of school. But ultimately, we want you as school leaders, as school staff, to feel equipped to be able to respond. And we do that through many different ways, but most primarily, we focus on the 4 pillars of what we call safe and healthy schools. We feel that all 4 of these areas are critically important to the safety and security of schools in general. There's, of course, always the physical, right? We have to make sure that doors lock. We need to make sure that there is an evacuation procedure, protocol. We want to do all of the physical aspects. I was brought on to the Joffe team to really give more attention and time to the psychological, social, emotional health of schools. We know that events that have led to unfortunate violence stem from some sort of psychological trauma or as a result of social, emotional unrest. And so we know that the psychological health of schools, students, and staff is really important. So we bring that lens from Joffe to the work of safety and security. And then the physical health and then technology and cybersecurity are really important to keeping schools safe. But it's not an isolated piece, right? Every single person, staff, leadership, students, parents, every single person in a school has the responsibility to safety. You're going to learn from today, what role, what piece of it do you play? And how can you lend your areas of expertise and support to that? We really feel that decreasing fear really starts with increasing confidence. And you're taking one of the very first steps, right? Like you're here to learn and better your protocols. Again, trauma-informed lens to this. But the more we learn and practice, the better prepared we feel. And so as maybe a classroom teacher, or many of you provide additional supports to students. So you might be in a classroom leading a lesson with a group of students. And if an emergency were to happen, what's your role in all of that? So again, whether it's leading or conversations with students or conversations with parents, every single person plays a critical role in school safety and well-being. So let's dig in a little bit about just what do we talk about? What do we think about when it comes to approaching emergency responses with a trauma-informed lens? Most predominantly, we know that lockdowns can be triggered due to police action in the neighborhood, or reality online threats nowadays, right? Or other perceived dangers. Or dangerous animals. We've heard a lot of dangerous animals on campuses this year. So that's a thing that might cause a lockdown. But lockdowns can save lives, right? And are considered the best practice in crisis response. But depending on the circumstances, some lockdowns may produce anxiety, stress, and traumatic symptoms in some students or staff. We can't forget that staff are heavily impacted by the responsibility of these drills. And so as well as, the loss of instructional time, right? Like in a time that we need to make sure that we're recouping any lost instructional time due to COVID, there's stress on that, right? So we don't have time to do lockdown drills because we need to focus on this. But ultimately, conducting drills is the best way that we can ensure that we can respond appropriately. Planning is critical. Schools should plan lockdown drills as part of their emergency preparedness plans. You should calendar it. You should schedule it. We'll talk a little bit about how you do that and what the steps are, but it's critical that administrators, school employed mental health professionals, school resource and police officers, and then any other members of crisis team or those that might work with students that have some special capabilities are included in that planning process, because you have to carefully develop the staff and student response protocol. And then planning should include considerations for age and developmental levels, disabilities that might impede mobility, access to instructions, sensory disabilities, and again, things that might heighten the distress reaction or impede response to instruction. Those are considerations. How are you going to communicate to students with special needs what they need to do? And then additionally, please take into consideration students that have a second language and how are they themselves and their families being notified about it. And then student learning is, of course, promoted by a predictable student day and by perceptions that their school is a safe place. So please remember that when we're thinking about our setting up how we're going to practice and consider this. How do we plan for and prepare for specifically lockdown situations, but it really is applicable across all emergency response protocols. So again, when we are preparing for a lockdown, we want to make sure that we develop differentiated response procedures for emergencies that happen in the community where schools should be on heightened alert. So we think about our different ways of locking down: secure campus, shelter in place, lockdown. Differentiating lockdowns can be helpful in mitigating potential traumatic experiences. So making sure that there's clear language, what's going to be a shelter in place drill versus a lockdown drill. And we want to communicate when there is not an immediate threat to the school, right? Like, we're going to go into lockdown, but just rest assured, this is because there's a community event. We ourselves are not in immediate danger. When we conduct drills, we want to both to ensure that there is an adaptation behavior in the event of an emergency, and to the ease, the stress of going through the real life emergency, right? Drills must be carefully planned and should be integrated into the yearly crisis preparation activities, so they know it's coming, right? Both staff know it's coming, students, families, all of that. And then you practice it so that when it does happen, it's an immediate, we call it muscle memory. It's an immediate, we know what to do when. We start with an orientation, right? Like, this is what we're going to do in a lockdown drill. It provides the overall purpose of what to expect. And then it can be tailored with each developmental level, secondary language status, all of those things. Again, those considerations are put into play when the clear expectations are laid out. We ensure to always announce lockdown drills. There is no research that says unannounced lockdown drills are more effective than announced. It's the practice of doing and conducting a lockdown drill that is the most critical. So we at Joffe support announcing lockdown drills. It's going to be held on X day at X time. Again, notifying students, notifying parents, family members, all of that. So then some other, again, additional tips or things to consider. To the extent possible, and again, we could do a whole nother session on how to treat and recognize, identify trauma responses, but to the extent possible, ensure that staff members are able to recognize the traumatic stress reactions and are able to support students during a lockdown situation. Again, they can identify when maybe a student is becoming a little restless or breathing a little heavier or beginning to disassociate a little bit. Again, teachers are going to be responsible for that entire classroom. So they're going to need to be able to identify and intervene accordingly. Ensure that a school administrator is present during a lockdown drill, right? Somebody needs to know that everything's working together. And so they need to be the one leading, directing, and debriefing around a lockdown drill. And then include the school resource officer and mental health professionals in the planning and the debriefing or evaluation process. Add a discussion of lockdown drills to the parent handbooks. What is your school going to do? How are you going to do it? And the rationales for discussing it. There's a very hot and cold discussion around whether we should or should not be conducting lockdown drills. But if it's part of your handbook, you can reference back to that. And then again, consider posting a message on social media when the school is conducting a drill to help prevent rumors or confusion. You know, if there's a sign out front that says we're in a lockdown, there's going to be all sorts of things that come of that. So consider posting that information to the broader audience. So as I said before, again, that is just context for as we're going to lead into and talk about the different types of emergency response protocols. Again, I'm going to start with the broad overview, not getting into the weeds on this. So if you came to hear all about the types of emergency response protocols, not today, maybe a future session, but I just want to give you the practices of what we follow and when you should consider implementing or thinking about trauma-informed approaches. So there's 4 overarching categories of emergency responses. There's the basics of, calling 911 when if, what's your procedures at the school, who makes those calls? Again, should 911 be the first call and all of that. So again, these are some of, you need to get information and know the procedures on how this is going to be done at your school and be well informed. There's the medical emergencies. A lot of school personnel are going to be trained in CPR, first aid, bloodborne pathogens, that kind of, things that you have to check off at your beginning of the year orientation. And then we move to evacuation and campus movement restrictions. Evacuations would come to fire, earthquakes, those kinds of situations. And then campus movement restrictions is where lockdowns come into place, and we're going to dig into that. So again, when we talk about campus movement restrictions, there's 3 categories that we classify under emergency response protocols: shelter in place, secure campus, and lockdown. And so when it is a shelter in place, and I'll give you some context around that, we're thinking about environmental factors. We're thinking about poor air quality. There are limitations that, again, for some reason, we just need to minimize our outdoor exposure. There's secure campus. There's not an immediate threat to our school community. There might be an outside community threat. So we're going to secure campus in preparations for if we need to move into a lockdown situation. And again, a lockdown situation is going to be an immediate threat to our school campus or community. So just differentiating a little bit more, again, quick overview of these types of response protocols. I hope that this training sparks an interest of yours, and you'll go back and you'll look at your school. They could be called emergency operations plans, safety handbooks. We've heard them all, right? I hope that if you're not familiar with your schools, that you will go back and look. You'll find, as I talk today, we create our emergency operations plan based on response-based protocol. We have found a lot of schools do more threat-based protocols. So they're going to have an emergency operations plan that is a lot of pages, because they're going to go over every possible threat that could come to campus and how we're going to respond. As a former school employee, I know you have a lot of free time on your hands, and you would love to read an 80-page emergency operations plan. To each their own. For us, we have felt narrowing it down to 4 response-based protocols lends itself to an easier interpretation and know-how. I'm going to call this particular announcement, and without doubt, you know how to move into that kind of response, rather than, oh man, there's a beehive on campus. What am I supposed to do? I don't remember. And so just thinking about that, that's top of mind. There was a football game last night. They went to the stadium, and there was this massive beehive on one of the goalposts. I don't know if anybody saw that. Anyways, that's top of mind for me. So beehives. But it would be easier to learn and know and retain how to respond in 4 different ways than 20 or 40, right? So when we talk about shelter in place, we're thinking about environmental factors, airborne particles in the air, significant pollen, air quality, maybe dangerous inclement weather that might cause harm to our students if we go outside. Wildfires are real. They are an extreme hazard. They can cause disruption in our school days because we can't go out to the playground because of the air quality and smoke in the air. So again, when we are in a shelter in place, there's going to be fewer departures and arrivals. Again, mostly on campus, it's normal, it's business as normal, but just with some limitations. People are going to be welcome to come in and out. But there might be a general announcement that says, hey, if you can restrict your outdoor time as much as possible, we're going to notify folks coming back to campus. Like you're going to see, we just ask that you cover your nose and mouth, or we're going to keep students inside as opposed to outside for dismissal, those kinds of things. Again, not needed for doors to be locked during this time. There's little change to really in-class instruction and indoor activities. From shelter in place, we might move to a secure campus. That would be the next more restricted campus movement. Again, there is not an immediate threat to campus, but there is some sort of community threat around the neighborhood. So again, thinking about there might be some criminal activity that's happening down the street a few blocks away. Maybe there's a bear on campus, or the coyotes in California I've heard of gotten out of control. So whether it's something that's like, yes, we are not going to let our kids outside because there's this potential, you have to be prepared to move into a lockdown situation from secure campus. Again, similar to shelter in place, fewer arrivals, departures, we're going to really monitor those closely. There's going to be announcements about what's happening because, again, in the absence of communication, everybody's going to make up their own story. Isn't that a Brene Brown reference, I believe? And so, again, we want to make sure that our parents and our school community know what's happening so there's not questions about it. With a secure campus, we do recommend that exterior campus doors remain locked. Again, we can let people in and out, but again, we're going to make sure that everyone inside is safe. But internally, all doors can remain open. You can move about, your campus as long as you don't have a lot of outdoor spaces. Move along internal spaces, and really little change to classroom activities and instruction. It's just really the external and in preparation that we have to move to a lockdown situation. So just to recap the difference in those two, again, shelter in place, external like air quality, environmental factors, secure campus, some sort of threat, but not an immediate threat to our campus. But we're going to make sure that we're prepared if we do have to go into a lockdown situation with secure campus. But in both of them, we're going to limit outdoor activity. Again, there's something outside that is impacting us. There's going to be a little bit of a decrease in arrivals, departures. We're going to know absolutely who's coming on and off of campus. But in both situations, kids are learning, right? We're doing same old, classrooms continuing, instruction continuing, all of that. Then our most restricted type of emergency response would be lockdown procedures. Lockdown procedures would be there is an imminent threat to our campus or our school community. So again, we're going to be in the most restrictive setting to make sure that our kids, our staff, everyone on campus is safe. Again, totally different, training opportunity to learn and get into the nitty-gritty of all of these specific drills and what they entail. For today's purpose, I'm just giving a really quick overview because most importantly, we want you to know how to prepare your students and staff for these types of drills, not so much how to conduct them per se. But again, the lockdown procedures, external doors are locked, internal doors are locked, and you are in lights out, quiet in the corner, out of sight type of scenario. There is an immediate threat to your campus, and you're going to make sure that nobody can see in or out of your classroom, and that kids and staff are quiet and unable to be sensed from within classrooms. So again, we want to make sure that any noises are, phones are silent, everybody's low to the ground, out of sight. Working with little ones, those pre-Ks, those kindergartners, it's going to be a really tough situation, right? And so how do we approach that with the little ones? We don't call it a lockdown drill with them. We're going to make up a different name. Like, we're going to play the quiet game. We're going to have, you know, a silent practice or those kinds of things. And then some tips and strategies that I've heard, again, have a bin prepared that if you are to be in a lockdown situation, over in the corner, there's some quiet activities that those kids can have. Hey, maybe we're going to have an unexpected quiet nap time, right? Who wouldn't love that? Maybe me. But we have those kinds of things that are set up for them. We've had schools that have a stock of suckers that are there to, again, play the quiet game and keep them as quiet as possible. So those kind of strategies, when you're talking about the little ones, is going to be really important. Ultimately, the lockdown drill is called, and either your building administrator, if it's just a drill, or law enforcement first responders are the only ones to lift that lockdown drill, the only ones. Those that are within the classroom, never, ever, ever should you be unlocking the door. The external partners, whether that's building administrators or law enforcement, they're the ones that are to be unlocking your door. So just some reminders. And I don't know if automatically, like, you've already pictured, if your schools already had a lockdown drill this year, that's great. Love to hear feedback on that. But if not, I encourage you to just ask, start the conversation. Do we have these lockdown drills? If so, when is it going to happen? If we don't, can you tell me more about it? Again, it is just doing this training and talking about it can be triggering for folks, right? You put yourself in that position to think about, oh my gosh, like, I have to get my kids in this corner and lights out and quiet. That's it's scary, right, to think about. But if we don't practice it, and it came time that we actually had to do a lockdown, that's scarier, not knowing what to do or finding out after the fact that a door doesn't lock, right? These are things we need to be thinking about in the pre-planning parts of it. The next few slides are questions that we ask ourselves in different settings. So having visited lots of campuses in California, there's very open spaces, a lot of outdoor learning spaces, right? So what do we do in those types of settings? What do we do in a classroom versus a hallway? And so the next set of slides are the questions that you ask yourself as you're entering these spaces or thinking about, what if I was in this position? How do I respond? So again, if you are in a classroom, whether you're leading a support group or leading an SEL activity or whatever it is that you're doing in a classroom, there's a lockdown drill called, did you hear it? That's really important. And if not, what's the barrier? Do you lack a PA system? Is there not a unified way that communication can flow through a school? Does it come through an all call on everybody's phones? How would you hear if there was a lockdown? And then thinking about, did you know what to do? Where would you go in that space? How do you lock that door? How do you get kids to silence their phones? Do you have your phone? And then again, who's going to do what? You have a matter of seconds, right? To lock the door, to turn off the lights, to pull down any blinds, and to get everybody in a corner. Seconds. What we know from Uvalde is at the point that the shooter entered the building and got into the classroom, I think it was 26 seconds. That's all we have to be able to secure our classrooms. So every space that you're in, these are the questions that we want you to ask. Are you able to secure yourself and your students in that classroom in a matter of seconds. Thinking about hallways, right? So we coach our classroom leaders and building administrators that you lock the door immediately. So the question comes, what if I'm in the hallway? What if a student left my classroom and went into the bathroom and they haven't returned and we've went into lockdown? What do we do then? So again, the questions you ask yourself, can it be heard in every space of the building when a lockdown is called? And if it can't be heard in a bathroom, we need to fix that, because there will be inevitably kids in a bathroom, right? Or schools. There's always kids in bathrooms. How are they going to know when we're in a lockdown situation? Where are they going to go if there's a lockdown situation? Is it something we need to plan for? Hey, students, if we are to do a drill and you are in a bathroom, here's the designated space that you're going to enter. You exit the bathroom, you stay in the bathroom. That's going to be a plan at your own school and with your leadership, because every building is different, but have a plan. And then again, what are the challenges to being in a hallway if there is a lockdown? Is there a nearby classroom? Is there, a movement restriction issue? How are we going to remedy that? Again, questions to ask as you're going through the spaces of your school. What about large areas, cafeterias, libraries? It's such an open format that where do we take our kids? Do we stay there or do we exit? So again, I've heard most prominently gymnasiums aren't connected to a PA system. How do they hear if there's an all call? Can you, in your spaces, hear when there's a lockdown situation? Can you effectively lock down in these spaces? Are there 8 doors that lead to this space? If so, can every single one of them be locked in one swift motion? Or does somebody have to go and lock every single door? And if so, is that feasible? How long does it take to get everybody in a space where they're quiet and out of sight? Can you get out of sight? And then how do you know when it's safe for the all clear? How are you going to be notified if you're in these large spaces? How will you know when it's safe to return? So again, the questions that I'm posing are really for you to go back and evaluate within your own school setting and reach out when you have questions. You'll have our contact information at the end. And then lastly, what about outside? Woo, outside is a whole nother piece, right? So these beautiful campuses with these large outdoor recreational spaces and fields for sports and all of that. Do you know when there's a lockdown? What do? You are out in all of it, right? For the world to see. You go out to that space and you evaluate. Are we going to return to the building? Are we going to leave the campus? Are we going to tell our kids to run? Because in this type of environment, that's the best case scenario. Or are we going to try to get indoors somewhere? Again, it's going to be what your procedures allow for or what your administrators want to follow when it comes to how to respond in these outdoor spaces. And then how long does it take? Again, you do a fire drill and you time it, right? Same thing happens for outdoor spaces. Are you able to get out of sight or clear the area in a timely manner? One important aspect in all drills is that you report attendance. The only way we're going to know if somebody is missing is through an attendance record. So there's lots of ways to report attendance, whether that's paper and pencil or some sort of app or platform that you report attendance. What I would recommend is that you have a strategy in place that allows for taking attendance. When, as I mentioned before, it is never okay for somebody internally in the classroom to unlock the door. An administrator, a first responder, somebody has to be the one to unlock the door, to announce that the lockdown has been lifted and that there's an all clear. Again, there is a very specific procedure that happens to ensure that the right and appropriate persons are clearing that lockdown. It's not up to the classroom person to clear the lockdown. So I want to go, I covered before, like how to prepare for with a trauma-informed lens, how to plan. Now I want to talk about like, what's our trauma-informed approach when we're actually like in a lockdown situation? So again, during a lockdown, it is of the utmost importance that you're providing clear and direct information. The specific procedures, how I'm going to do. Carefully consider, again, that developmental age, right? The vocabulary, the words that you're using. For example, like when we're doing it with young children, saying go or get out and evacuate instead of like escape or run. Like, again, some of those changes in vocabulary are gonna help support a calm and orderly action and mitigate any psychological impacts of crisis when we choose our words carefully. We want to model a controlled response, right? An effective response should result in staff who inspire a calm and confidence in the students, right? We ourselves need to be calm during those situations because we're modeling that for the students. We want to communicate clearly during the lockdown, whether or not there's an imminent danger to the campus, right? If there's not, we want to tell them that we're just doing this for safety reasons, right? We're okay here. We're just going to do it to prevent any potential. And then communicate clearly with families via a pre-established system. Again, they need to be notified in advance that there's going to be a lockdown drill, or if you are in lockdown situation, that message gets out immediately. So again, they don't start making up their own stories and assumptions. Again, critical to have a member of the crisis team monitoring any misinformation, right? We want to make sure that the messages align with what's actually happening. And then again, use the appropriate level of campus movement restriction. We don't need to go immediately into lockdown, again, if it's an air quality issue, right? That's going to conjure a lot of unnecessary feelings and reactions. So a full-scale lockdown should be employed only when it's absolutely necessary due to an imminent threat to the school. No other reason should we be calling a lockdown drill or lockdown call. So after a lockdown, we want to make sure that we're working, we would call it the public information officer, your primary communications point of contact, to communicate quickly with parents and the neighboring schools and the media as much factual detail as possible. And we want to make sure that we're updating that on a regular basis. We want to make sure that you have a student and caregiver reunification process in place. If you haven't practiced that, you've only done the drill part and you haven't went through the full reunification process, I highly encourage you to do that. A lot of schools will run drills, but then if they actually have to do a reunification and they haven't practiced it, it causes a lot of chaos, to put it lightly. We're going to give primary caregivers guidance on how to talk to their kids about their concerns and their fears related to violence at schools in the community. We have some resources at the end of this presentation. If you work with the younger kids, there's a Sesame Street video on school violence, and it's so sweet. I mean, it's a great video. I would encourage you to share that. And then there's other documents that we have put together on talking points for that. Again, recognize when there's trauma reactions and other mental health intervention assistance when needed. Have somebody prepared to respond in the case that somebody is triggered. Make sure that there's an opportunity for students and staff to share their reactions. I hope I'm going to have a really quick few minutes to talk about debriefing. That's important for students just as much as it is for staff. So give them an opportunity and a space to provide feedback and reactions to that. And then ensure that an evaluation of the lockdown is conducted. Again, drills are the best way to practice and know where our gaps are. So just again, in summary, like lockdowns are an important part of school safety and crisis preparedness. However, it's imperative that school leaders understand that perceptions of safety or risk, that even in the absence of a real threat, can have a real effect on students and staff. And so again, we want to take all precautions and planning to reduce any and all, minimize the potential or unintended harm from them. So again, I referenced the resources, again, talking to students. That video from Sesame Street is on there. I encourage you to check these out. Do we have time to just pause for maybe a couple questions, or not questions, but really for you to just stop and write down any questions that you might have? I know that I have given you a lot of information.
And Kerry, looking at time, because I do want them to get to debrief, I'm going to recommend, if you have a question, just drop it in the Q&A or the chat, and we'll handle that. And we'll have about 5 minutes for questions with you, Kerry, as well. A lot of requests for the materials, and those will be available after the presentation. So if that absolves some anxiety for you all, that's there for you as well. So really would love to get to the debrief part.
Let's go then.
All right.
Keep plugging along.
Excellent.
So again, what we're providing are resources and high-level overview of why it's important and how do we conduct a debrief. What is the purpose of a debrief? Again, just like lockdowns, when you know better, you do better. So practicing it allows for you to see where are gaps, where do we need to improve, where can we do some more training. It renorms and clarifies roles and responsibilities. Again, if we conduct a drill and a teacher's like, man, I had no idea where I was supposed to go or what I was supposed to do, a debrief scenario is a great way for them to ask their questions in a safe environment, right? It's not, the purpose of a debrief is not to blame, but it's to learn and educate and do better for next time. And again, communication is one of the largest categories when we conduct drills where there was a breakdown. So whether they didn't hear or whether they didn't receive or know what to do, communication in all facets is one of the biggest, the most important piece, and often the one that gets overlooked. So debriefing allows to look at all of those. What are some examples? Again, not an exhaustive list, of course, but again, if there has been a drill, if there has been a situation at your school that has warranted some sort of reaction, if there was an unfortunate circumstance that has impacted the school community, let's talk about it. How do we address it? How do we move forward and learn from it? And again, remembering that what you experienced should be debriefed. That's the point of a debrief, right? For you to share your information and experience about it. So how do we prepare for? So again, 5 quick points. We're going to make sure that there is a facilitator. somebody that's leading the charge, leading the conversation, asking the questions so that it is productive. That we are covering the basics of what happened and who should be present at the debrief. Maybe some people that were impacted and involved, and maybe some folks that weren't, for an outside perspective. There's a couple of ways that we can debrief, and I'll talk about that. We have templates for the communication that you would send to set up and following a debrief. And then again, just the logistics of where you're going to have this and what the, roles of the meeting are going to be. So again, this is, in here we've attached a template or a how-to debrief document for you to reference after this webinar. But again, the main areas are the who, what, where, and when. Make sure we have all of those criteria in preparing for the debrief. Most importantly, we don't want to have it in the space that the incident happened, right? We want a little bit of a detachment from it. And we need to allow for a few days for things to kind of resonate and think about and sit with us before we can effectively debrief the situation. When you do it too soon after an incident, our minds are always in a place that we can think clearly. So we would encourage you to wait 3 to 5 days after the incident. So there's 2 types to debrief. And again, we're going to provide you the steps. So you can do the real-time debrief or you can do the real-time learn. So again, the real-time debrief, you're going to do everything in person. All 6 steps are going to be done there in the moment during the meeting. Or there's the real-time learn that we're going to do some pre-work before the debrief, and we're going to come with some already predetermined responses and action steps and move it forward that way. Again, pros and cons to each. You'll be able to digest and evaluate what the best scenario for you to conduct. And it might go back and forth, right? One time you might do a real-time debrief and one time you might do a kind of a listen and learn session. Some expectations for the facilitator, whoever is identified. It is your responsibility to set forth the clear expectations, make sure it truly is a safe environment to share the information, and that everything remains as neutral as possible, right? There's no sides. You are the information gatherer. You are the Swiss Army of them, right? The neutral party in all of this. So the last couple slides are really about the principles and the model that we at Joffe follow when it comes to debriefing, and it's the CPI crisis development model. Again, link directly to that resource in the slides for you to reference later, but there's 6 parts to it, right? So the first is the control. These are the questions that you're asking yourself as you're moving through the debriefing process. How you're going to get your responses and learn and grow from. So again, what were the physical, emotional parts of the incident? Has it been enough time to accurately and effectively debrief the situation? We want to orient ourselves. We want the facts, right? There's going to be a lot of he said, she said, or very qualitative inputs. Dependent on each person and their experience. So make sure that we are getting factual information when we are debriefing. You're going to be looking as you have the conversations. What were the patterns? What were the trends that we're seeing in the incident? Was there a universal concern about XYZ that multiple people are voicing? We want to make sure that we address that, right? We investigate what needs to change. That is the most important part of a debrief. What did we do well? And what are areas to grow in, right? How can we prevent this from happening again? Or how can we make sure that this exact same thing happens again if we did something really well? And then finally, we all come to an agreement that if there are changes that need to be done, that we're going to do that universally, right? Again, we're not laying any fault if something went went wrong, but we're here to offer support and make sure that everybody has the resources that they need to do better the next time. And then again, give is like that building of morale. We're all in this together, right? We're doing this exercise that you can trust me and I can trust you, and you can have the confidence that if something needs to be addressed, I'm going to do it. So again, making sure that there's closure to it and a summary of what the next steps are. And the template that we provide has emails, again, how you set up a debrief, and then how you follow up after a debrief to those that attended it. So you'll have that information available to you when the slide deck is sent out. Lastly, if you don't want this to be the beginning and the end of our relationship, here are some resources. Joffe has biweekly webinars. We have newsletters that come out. Shoot us a question, right? We're here to support all schools when it comes to safety and security. Please don't hesitate to shoot us an email and ask your questions. And then Joffe Academy is an online platform that we are putting content in for continued education around this topic. So with that, I know I cut our time short, but we have 3 minutes.
We have 3 minutes. That's excellent. I know you all probably have a lot more questions, and we encourage you to stay in touch. First thing I want to ask is that you look into the chat for a survey on feedback so that we can continue to offer you quality resources like Joffe, like Kerry, but also future webinars and speakers. One question that came in from the chat. First of all, we have attendees from all over, Kerry. I think I counted 12 states at one point. I'll get you the final numbers, but a variety of roles, everything from nurses to social workers, mental health specialists, directors, administrators, etc. They're hoping that you can expand on the suggestion to have announced drills instead of unannounced drills. And I think this is around that theme of, I loved how you put it, increasing confidence, right? Decreasing fear by increasing confidence. And so if you could elaborate on that for a little bit, and I think we have one other question after that.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, there is no data that supports unannounced drills are more effective. Again, if we are approaching all of this work from the lens that it sounds like we're sharing this trauma-informed lens, then letting students, staff, parents know this is what's coming and this is why we're doing it. That's what they want to know. We're in this very secluded area. Why do we need to do the lockdown drill? They need to understand the importance of it. So giving them notice ahead of time is going to alleviate fears, anxiety, and questions of why it's important. If your school administrator is sending out this communication, this is what we're doing and this is why we're doing it, parents might choose to not send their student on that day. Right? And that, of course, is their choice. But as a school employee, I'd want to know why. Tell me why you have fears about, or why you don't want to send your child to school that day. Let me help you understand why we're doing this and maybe ease some of those concerns. So it really does also, giving prior notice to these drills does allow parents and students to provide the feedback. I'm feeling anxious about XYZ, or I need more information about XYZ. So again, announced drills are just as good, if not better, than unannounced drills when it comes to lockdown scenarios. When you do fire and tornado, earthquake, all of those can be unannounced. But when it comes to lockdown drills, we would encourage schools to do announced.
Excellent. And then I see Sarah's put an invitation. Do you mind changing the slide for me, Kerry, real quick?
Yes.
To our next event. While we still have you all, want to invite you to hear from Frank DeAngelis. I know Sarah has a relationship and longstanding time, so she can give a little bit of a preview of that. Before we do that, I think with the lockdown, the one thing around unannounced drills is there's plenty of opportunities for them. They come up with the beehive like you were talking about. There's all these moments where we have to improvise. And so even if you are doing an unannounced drill, having that communication ready to go to contextualize for your community to send out so that they know as early as possible that there's nothing to worry about mitigates a lot of that fear, even in an unannounced situation. So Sarah, would you like to preview? And I know some of you all
Sure.
have to go. Yep.
Sure. We don't want to take up any more of your time, but we invite you to come and listen with my good friend and colleague, Frank DeAngelis. He is the former principal of Columbine High School, and he currently leads a group of superintendents called the Recovery Superintendents. And he is going to come and talk to us about how he restored health and healing in his community at Columbine. He's an excellent speaker, and we're going to definitely make that a more interactive discussion with him directly, so that you can even give us some questions ahead of time that you'd like us to ask. But have a great discussion with a man who has led the way in building healthy, healing communities in the face of trauma. And so stay tuned for more on how to register for that from us. It is October 14th at 9 a.m. Pacific time. And we would love to hear from you on other subjects that you'd like us to bring learning to for you through our strategy to support all of you in the field. So feel free to reach out to Miriam or myself, and we will try and find speakers and trainings and support for all of you. I thank you for your time today. We've gone over 1 or 2 minutes, and I apologize for that. Thank you, Kerry, for helping us start to break down what a trauma-informed safety plan looks like. And I appreciate your time today as well. And I hope everyone has a lovely, lovely week. Thank you all.